You are listening to HOA Karen Gets Denied. I wish this was exaggerated. Karen pointed at an email printout and screamed that forwarding it was a violation. You are out of warnings, and I am done being nice, Pamela Cooper shouted, waving a laminated policy sheet in my face like it was a court order. Her cheap plastic badge glinted under the porch lights that were just starting to flicker on across Ridgeview Estates. I stood on the sidewalk by the mailbox cluster, holding a tow release receipt in a clear sleeve, and I did not say a word. I just watched her thermal printer spit out another instant notice, the paper curling in the breezy dusk air. I am a cybersecurity analyst. I work in Duluth, Minnesota, and I save every email, every timestamp, every receipt. That habit is why I am still standing here, and why Pamela is about to have a very bad week. This story is not about a parking violation or a mailbox flag. This is about a cold case I reopened because it targeted me again, and when I pulled the thread, the whole HOA enforcement operation unraveled. Let me back up. 3 weeks ago, I got a tow notice taped to my door. The complaint said I had parked in a guest spot for 6 consecutive nights, which was a lie. I work nights, and my assigned spot is right in front of my unit. The notice included a deadline, a fine schedule, and a threat that the tow company would be dispatched if I did not respond in writing within 48 hours. I looked at the wording and something clicked. I had seen this exact phrasing before. Same template, same passive-aggressive closing line, same bogus reference to a rule that did not exist in the current covenants. I take care of my younger brother who is disabled and lives with me. Towing my car or blocking my access would be a crisis. So I did not panic. I started collecting. I pulled the email archive, found the original complaint from 2 years ago that used the same wording, and realized someone had copy-pasted an old enforcement action and changed the date. That someone was Pamela Cooper, Rules Enforcement Chair for the Ridgeview Estates Property Owners Association, and she had a pattern. Pamela loved warning letters. She loved deadlines. She loved walking the property with a stopwatch and a ruler, measuring garbage can setbacks and noting porch light bulb brightness. She wore that cheap plastic badge on every inspection walk, and she carried a clipboard with a clear rain cover so her notices would not smudge. She also had a catchphrase she repeated to anyone who questioned her: "I have all day, and so does my fine meter." The first time I heard it, I thought it was a joke. The second time, I realized it was a threat. The town notice was step 1. Step 2 came 4 days later when I submitted a records request to see the original complaint and the board meeting minutes where my violation was supposedly discussed. The HOA management company denied the request, citing a policy they would not show me. They said the records were under review and I would be notified when they were available. No timeline, no explanation, no apology, just a polite brush-off and a reminder that my fine was still accumulating daily. That is when I knew this was not about parking. This was about control, and Pamela had been running this play for years. I started digging into the cold case, the one that never made sense. 2 years ago, a neighbor named Marcus got hit with a lien threat for unpaid dues, even though he had payment confirmations for every quarter. The HOA claimed his checks had bounced, but the bank records showed they cleared. Marcus fought it for months, then gave up and moved out. The case disappeared from the meeting minutes, and nobody talked about it again. Until now. I pulled Marcus's old emails from my archive. I'd copied him on a few HOA questions back then, and he had replied with his side of the story. I found 3 clues that connected to my current mess. First, Marcus's lien notice used the same template language as my tow notice, word for word. Second, the meeting minutes that supposedly discussed his case had a creation date 6 weeks after the meeting, according to the file metadata. Third, the complaint against Marcus came from an anonymous source, but the handwriting on the original paper complaint matched a note Pamela had left on my door months earlier, telling me to trim my shrubs. I had a theory. Pamela was using old enforcement templates to manufacture violations, then altering the meeting minutes after the fact to cover her tracks. If the minutes did not match what actually happened at the meeting, she could claim anything she wanted, and the board would back her up because they trusted the paperwork. It was bureaucratic fraud, and it was working because nobody kept their own records. Except me. I keep everything. I took screenshots of the metadata, printed the template comparisons, and built a binder with plastic sleeves and color-coded tabs. I also reached out to my ally, a neighbor named Eric who has a drone and loves overhead property shots. Eric had been at the meeting 2 years ago when Marcus's case was discussed, and he remembered something important. The vote to approve the lien was unanimous, but the final minutes said it was a split vote with one abstention. That discrepancy was my smoking gun. I met Eric at the mailbox cluster to hand over the missing page from the original meeting minutes. He had pulled it from his personal notes, and it showed the unanimous vote in his handwriting, dated and signed by the secretary at the time. That secretary had quit a month later, and Pamela took over minute-taking duties. Convenient. That is when Pamela showed up. She must have been watching because she arrived within 60 seconds, her thermal printer already fired up and ready to spit out another notice. "You do not get to hold secret meetings by the mailboxes," she said, her voice sharp and theatrical. "This is common property, and I am documenting this interaction for the next board review." She aimed her phone at us like she was a cop with a body camera. Eric did not flinch. He just handed me the page and said, "This is public property, Pamela, and we are not on HOA business. You can document all you want." She ignored him and turned to me. "You are in violation of the records request policy," she said. "You submitted a request without using the correct form, so it was denied. You need to resubmit using the portal, and you have 48 hours or the request is void." I did not argue. I just said, "I submitted through the portal 3 days ago. I have the upload confirmation screenshot with the timestamp." She blinked, then recovered fast. "That is not the current form," she said. "The board updated the policy last week, and you need to use the new version." "Where is the new form?" I asked. She waved her clipboard. "It is in the rules binder at the management office. You can pick it up during business hours." I stopped arguing and started collecting, because the endgame was already set. I had the upload screenshot. I had the metadata. I had Eric's handwritten note. I had the template comparisons. And I had a notary appointment booked for the next morning, because missing it would delay my sworn statements for weeks, and I was not giving Pamela that opening. If you are loving this receipts mode breakdown, hit that like button and subscribe, because the next move is going to blow your mind. The next morning, I walked into the Ridgeview Estates management office lobby with my binder, my phone, and a printed copy of the records request confirmation. The lobby was small, just a reception desk and a few chairs, but the walls were covered in framed policies and rule summaries with no readable text. The receptionist, a woman named Linda, looked up and gave me a tired smile. She knew why I was there. Pamela had already called ahead and told her not to release any records until I used the new form. I set the binder on the desk and opened it to the tab marked Records Request Denial. "I need to speak to the management supervisor," I said. Linda hesitated, then picked up the phone and made a quick call. A man named Greg came out from the back office. He was mid-40s, balding, wearing a polo shirt with the management company logo. He looked annoyed before I even started talking. "What is this about?" he asked. I handed him the upload confirmation screenshot. "I submitted a records request through your portal 3 days ago," I said. "It was denied with a reference to a policy that does not exist in the current version of the covenants. I was told to resubmit using a new form, but nobody can show me this new form. I need the original complaint, the meeting minutes, and the enforcement log for my unit and for a prior case involving a resident named Marcus." Greg looked at the screenshot, then at Linda. "Did we update the request form?" he asked. Linda shook her head. "Not that I know of." Greg sighed and turned back to me. "Let me pull the file." He disappeared into the back office and came back 5 minutes later with a thin folder. He opened it on the desk and flipped through 3 pages. "There is no complaint on file for your unit," he said. "And the minutes for the last 6 months do not mention any parking enforcement actions." I did not blink. "So the tow notice I received was issued without a formal complaint or board approval," I said. Greg looked uncomfortable. He glanced at Linda, then back at me. "I will need to call the board president and clarify this." I nodded. "Do that. And while you are at it, check the metadata on the minutes file. I think you will find it was created after the meeting date." Greg did not like that. He closed the folder and said, "I am not going to discuss file metadata with a homeowner. If you have a formal complaint, submit it in writing." "I already did," I said, 3 days ago. "And I have proof." I showed him the binder tab with the template comparisons, the metadata screenshots, and Eric's handwritten note. His face changed. He looked at the pages for a long moment, then picked up the phone again. This time he called someone and spoke quietly. When he hung up, he said, "The board attorney will be in touch. I am not releasing any records until we have legal guidance." That was fine. I had what I needed. I left the office, got in my car, and drove straight to the notary appointment. I had my sworn statement ready, and I had a second copy for the HOA attorney, so the legal risk would be obvious. The statement laid out the template fraud, the metadata discrepancies, the denied records request, and the retaliation timeline. It was 5 pages single-spaced with exhibits attached. I signed it, got it notarized, and mailed 1 copy to the management company and 1 copy to the board attorney via certified mail with return receipt. Then I waited. 2 days later, Pamela escalated. She sent a new notice claiming I had damaged common property and must pay immediately or be charged daily. The damage was supposedly to a landscaping bed near my unit, and the notice included photos with no readable text showing tire tracks and mulch. The problem was, those tire tracks were not from my car. My car has all-season tires with a specific tread pattern, and the tracks in the photos were from a wider, more aggressive tire. I took my own photos, grabbed a measuring tape, and documented the tread width difference. Then I filed a counterclaim with the management company, accusing Pamela of falsifying evidence. That same afternoon, Eric texted me. He had been flying his drone over the property for a legal overhead view, and he caught something interesting. Pamela had been walking the property with a tow driver, pointing at various cars and taking notes. She was calling different tow drivers like she was speed dialing chaos, trying to find one who would haul my car without a formal board authorization. Eric sent me the drone footage with GPS timestamps, and I added it to the binder. By now, the board was starting to panic. I knew this because Greg called me and asked if I would be willing to attend an emergency meeting to discuss my concerns. I said yes, but only if the meeting was recorded and the minutes were distributed within 48 hours. He agreed. The meeting was set for the following Monday at the community clubhouse. The weekend before the meeting, I got a call from a number I did not recognize. It was a board member named Steve, and he sounded nervous. He said he needed to talk to me off the record. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Duluth, and he told me something that changed everything. The HOA had been paying a vendor with no contract on file. The vendor was the tow company Pamela kept calling, and they had been getting monthly retainer payments for 2 years with no competitive bid and no board vote authorizing the expense. Steve did not know how it started, but he suspected Pamela had set it up when she took over the enforcement role. That was my twist. The tow company was not just a vendor. They were a partner in the fraud. Pamela was using them to intimidate homeowners, and in exchange, they got a steady income stream with no oversight. Steve gave me copies of the payment ledger, and I added them to the binder. The ledger showed payments going back to the same month Marcus got his lien threat. It all connected. I asked Steve why he was telling me this. He said because I voted for that lien 2 years ago, and I just found out the minutes were altered after the meeting. I abstained, but the final minutes say I voted yes. If this goes to court, I am exposed, and I did not do anything wrong. I want this fixed before it blows up. I told him I appreciated the honesty, and I would make sure his cooperation was noted in my records. Then I asked him one more question. Who else knows about the vendor payments? He shook his head. Just me and the treasurer quit last month. Pamela is acting treasurer now. That was the last piece. Pamela had control of the money, the minutes, and the enforcement process. She was a one-woman HOA dictatorship, and she had been getting away with it because nobody kept their own records. Until now. The emergency meeting happened on Monday evening. The clubhouse was packed. Word had spread through the neighborhood that something big was going down, and at least 20 homeowners showed up, including Eric and Steve. Pamela sat at the head table with 3 other board members and Greg from the management company. She had her clipboard, her badge, and her thermal printer set up like she was running a tribunal. The mood was tense. Greg opened the meeting and explained that the board had received a formal complaint from me regarding enforcement procedures and records integrity. He said the board took the complaint seriously and wanted to address my concerns in a transparent forum. Then he turned to me and asked if I wanted to present my case. I stood up, walked to the front with my binder, and set it on the table in front of Pamela. I started with the town notice. I showed the template comparison, the metadata screenshot, and the upload confirmation for my records request. Pamela interrupted me within 30 seconds. "That is not admissible," she said. "You cannot use email headers as evidence because they can be edited." I smiled and said, "That is why I brought the server logs." I pulled a printout from the binder and handed it to Greg. "These are the email server logs from my work account, showing the exact time the notice was sent and the IP address it originated from. That IP address belongs to the management company portal, and the timestamp matches my upload confirmation." Pamela went quiet. Then I moved to the Marcus case. I showed Eric's handwritten note and the altered minutes side by side. The room got very quiet. Steve cleared his throat and said, "I was at that meeting. The vote was unanimous. The final minutes are wrong." Greg looked at Pamela. "Do you have an explanation for this discrepancy?" he asked. Pamela waved her hand. "That was 2 years ago. Memories fade. The minutes are the official record." I said, "Then why does the file metadata show the minutes were created 6 weeks after the meeting?" Greg asked to see the metadata printout. I handed it to him. He looked at it, then looked at Pamela. "This is a serious issue," he said. "If the minutes were altered, we need to investigate." Pamela stood up and pointed at me. "This is harassment," she said. "He is trying to undermine the board because he does not want to pay his fines. I have all day, and so does my fine meter." I looked at the room and said, "I do not need proof. I have paperwork and vibes. That is what you told Marcus 2 years ago, right?" The room erupted. People started shouting questions at Pamela. Someone asked about the vendor payments. Someone else asked about the records request policy. Greg tried to restore order, but it was too late. I pulled out the payment ledger Steve had given me and handed it to Greg. "This is a copy of the HOA payment ledger," I said. "It shows monthly payments to a tow company with no contract on file, no competitive bid, and no board authorization. The payments started the same month Marcus got his lien threat, and they have been going out every month since." I brought a second copy for the HOA attorney, so the legal risk is obvious. Greg looked at the ledger, then at Pamela. He did not say anything, but his face said everything. Pamela stood up and grabbed her clipboard. "This meeting is over," she said. "I am not going to sit here and be attacked." She turned to leave, but Steve blocked the door. "Pamela, you need to answer these questions," he said. "If the minutes were altered, that is fraud. If the vendor payments are unauthorized, that is embezzlement. You cannot just walk out." Pamela tried to push past him, but Steve did not move. The room was silent. Then Greg spoke. "Pamela, I am suspending all enforcement actions pending a full audit. You are not to issue any notices, contact any vendors, or access the financial records until we complete the investigation." Pamela turned red. "You do not have the authority to suspend me," she said. Greg pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. "I just got off the phone with the board attorney," he said. "The attorney has advised that we cease all enforcement activity immediately to limit liability. You are suspended. Effective now." Pamela screamed. She literally screamed. She grabbed her thermal printer, her clipboard, and her badge, and she stormed out of the clubhouse. The door slammed behind her, and the room stayed silent for a few seconds. Then someone started clapping. Then someone else. Then the whole room erupted in applause. Eric stood up and said, "About time." Steve exhaled and sat down. Greg looked at me and said, "I am going to need copies of everything in that binder." I spent the next hour walking the board through every tab in the binder. I showed them the template fraud, the metadata discrepancies, the vendor payments, the drone footage, and the tread width analysis. By the end, Greg was taking notes, Steve was shaking his head, and the other board members were asking how they could have missed this. I said, "You trusted the paperwork, and the paperwork was fake." That is how it works. The meeting ended with a unanimous vote to authorize a full forensic audit of the HOA finances and records. Greg said the management company would hire an independent auditor, and the results would be shared with all homeowners. He also said the board would hold a special meeting to address the vendor contract issue and the enforcement policy revisions. Then he turned to me and said, "I apologize. This should not have happened." I nodded and said, "Just make sure it does not happen again." I left the clubhouse and walked back to my unit. Eric caught up with me in the parking lot and handed me a thumb drive. "I pulled the full drone footage," he said. "GPS timestamps, flight path, everything. If you need it for court, you have it." I thanked him and went inside. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and started writing a formal complaint to the state HOA regulatory board. I included the binder, the ledger, the drone footage, and the sworn statement. I was not done yet. 2 weeks later, the audit results came back. The auditor found 3 major issues. First, the meeting minutes for the past 2 years had been altered after board approval, with changes ranging from vote counts to enforcement action summaries. Second, the tow company vendor payments were unauthorized and violated the HOA procurement policy. Third, Pamela had been issuing enforcement notices without board approval and collecting fines into a separate account that was not disclosed in the annual budget. The total amount missing was over $12,000. The board held another emergency meeting, and this time Pamela did not show up. Greg read the audit summary aloud, and the room went silent. Then the board voted unanimously to terminate Pamela from all HOA roles, refer the financial discrepancies to law enforcement, and void all enforcement actions issued under her authority for the past 2 years. That meant my tow notice was void, Marcus's lien was void, and every other bogus fine and violation Pamela had manufactured was wiped clean. The payoff came 3 weeks later at a public meeting moment where the minutes turn against Karen. The board secretary read the corrected minutes from the Marcus meeting, and the record now showed the unanimous vote with no abstention. Steve stood up and said, "I want to apologize to Marcus and to everyone else who was targeted by Pamela's enforcement abuse. This should have been caught years ago, and I take responsibility for not asking more questions." The room applauded again. Then the funny karma beat hit. Someone in the back asked if Pamela's stopwatch and ruler routine had been documented in the audit. Greg said yes, and the auditor had noted that Pamela's enforcement inspections violated the HOA privacy policy because she was entering private property without notice. The room erupted in laughter. Someone shouted, "Did she measure the ruler with a second ruler?" The whole room lost it. Even Greg smiled. Karen's stopwatch and ruler routine gets mocked by the room, and it was glorious. The final piece fell into place a month later. The HOA retracts the enforcement action in writing, and I get a certified letter from the board attorney confirming that all notices, fines, and liens issued by Pamela are void and expunged from my homeowner record. The letter also says the HOA is implementing new oversight procedures to prevent future abuse, including mandatory board approval for all enforcement actions and quarterly audits of the financial accounts. Karen's own selective enforcement gets documented in the minutes, and the board formally apologizes to me and to Marcus in the official record. I called Marcus and told him the news. He laughed and said, "I knew something was wrong, but I did not have the energy to fight it. Thank you for finishing what I started." I said, "You started it. I just had the receipts to prove it." We both laughed, and he said he was considering moving back to Ridgeview now that Pamela was gone. I told him he should. The neighborhood is a lot quieter now. Pamela never came back. She resigned from the HOA board before the audit was finalized, and she moved out of Ridgeview 3 months later. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she tried to join the HOA board at her new development, but someone Googled her name and found the audit report, which the board had posted on the homeowner portal for transparency. She was rejected. Karma has a long memory. The HOA is still recovering. The board hired a new management company, rewrote the enforcement policy, and set up a homeowner advisory committee to review all rule changes before they go to a vote. I was invited to join the committee, and I said yes. Someone has to keep the receipts, and I am very good at that. Looking back, the whole thing was exhausting, infuriating, and deeply satisfying. Pamela thought she could bury the truth under layers of paperwork and procedural nonsense, but she forgot one thing. Some of us keep every email, every timestamp, every receipt. And when you reopen a cold case with that kind of firepower, the truth does not stay buried. I appreciate you being here.